Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this presentation on building a positive organizational culture for the future of Google. My name is Taylor Rambo, and I am joined today by Traci Cruz, Jimmy Fanning, Tony Misanko, Jennifer Mullins, and Megan Walden. Today we are responding to an investigative article by Nitasha Tiku focused around diversity issues at Google, which appeared on Wired.com in January of 2018. After a brief explanation and identification of the background and issues at play, we will be recommending a number of improvements for Google's management and laying out our key outcomes. We will then translate these outcomes into objectives and build an action plan around those objectives. Of course, it is important for us to recognize what positive and negative consequences might come from these changes. Finally, we will summarize our findings, and the presentation will culminate in a realism check to gauge the feasibility of our plan. Now I'll hand it over to Megan Walden for a review of the background.
Thanks for the introduction, Taylor. I'll start by giving a background of the case. So back in 2017, James Damore, an engineer at Google, published a highly controversial internal memo discussing company culture and diversity, and was later fired. This memo, along with his following lawsuit, brought to light severe issues throughout the company. Harassment and threats had become commonplace, and most employees were timid to say anything for fear that their every word would be recorded and taken out of context. At the staff level, one of the key issues was, obviously, Damore's inappropriate memo that brought these issues to light. But more importantly, another key issue was the use of these polarizing internal discussion boards, where topics and verbiage were unlimited. And even more than that was the groupthink that had spread throughout Google, with each group believing they were morally correct and all the others wrong. This groupthink even led to overwhelming HR via, quote, denial of service attacks. At the leadership level, the key issues were Google leadership's non-assertive, laissez-faire response, and also the company's far too neutral stance, creating a paradox of tolerance. Everything, even inappropriate and threatening behavior, was tolerated. Throughout Google, there were many organizational behavior issues at play, including dysfunctional conflict, groupthink, lack of a psychologically safe climate, laissez-faire leadership, and essentially non-existent rules of engagement. Conflict among coworkers had morphed into battles rather than trying to understand different points of view. Groupthink was perpetuating the segregation of coworkers and breeding a psychologically unsafe climate for all other employees. Additionally, leadership would simply tell people to knock it off and just wanted employees to get back to work without trying to identify or resolve the root causes of the disagreements. Finally, nothing clear was in place to define proper norms or acceptable engagement with coworkers. So disrespect and threats became the new norm. From here, I'll hand it off to Tony to detail our recommendations to resolve these organizational behavior issues.
Thank you, Megan. The team has come up with some recommendations that we have for the company and their leadership team. First thing, they need to establish some new norms and set clear rules of engagement to improve the organization's culture. This means going back to the Code of Business Conduct and making sure that everyone understands it and everybody is following it. Second, they need to make sure that the escalation procedure or process is followed when needed, and they need to enforce the new rules that are going to be put in place. Number two, they need to empower the leadership team to manage these conversations rather than shying away from them. They need to understand that the ombudsman is there for all employees and how to gain access and make complaints when required. And leadership training is going to be imperative. Third, they need to address this groupthink issue or problem that they're having, and they need to make some training programs around diversity, sensitivity training, and also the unconscious bias. With that, hopefully the desired outcomes will be, at an organizational level, demonstrate that the employees are valued and build their trust and credibility in the company. 2, at a team level, building a culture and mutual respect across all groups. And then at an individual level, all employees feel safe at work. Next, I'll turn it over to Jen, and she will talk about the action plans that need to be put in place and the objectives and expectations going forward for the company.
Regardless of any other changes, Google's success will strongly depend on how well they manage to define ethics and compliance going forward. By setting a code of conduct, or a set of organizational rules describing the business's values, beliefs, and ethical standards, they could create a stable platform for employees to engage and work. Workplace values are guiding principles, and a code of conduct can serve several purposes, including helping employees make hard decisions and empowering managers. Managers in these situations would have the latitude and autonomy to address employees candidly and provide them with a development plan to move forward. As an action plan, Google should determine upon and set clear objectives in the coming months. For the first 30 days or so, Google should determine and begin to action the rules of engagement and code of business conduct in which they would like to engage. It is important in the first 90 days of actions to establish and clarify the acceptable norms for the workplace. Leaders should be given clear expectations with reasonable power to support and enforce an outlined route of escalation.
Thank you, Jen. With a new set code of conduct and defined escalation procedures, we can begin phase 2 of the action plan, which is the implementation of better training programs at Google. To satisfy our plan's second objective, we will first establish training for all of Google's leadership, inclusive of the board, executive leadership, and major department and team leads. By the end of month 7 of the plan, leaders at Google will learn the following. 1. The legal ramifications of the old work culture. During trainings, the General Counsel and Google's legal team should present their insights on the costs of workplace discrimination lawsuits to leadership, which compound workplace conflict and can directly hurt Google's bottom line. 2. How they can be empowered leaders to support this new positive organizational culture. The old Google was focused on neutrality, enabling unacceptable laissez-faire leadership styles. The new Google will focus on intentionality, and leaders will be expected to be considerate in their approach to management. And 3. Leadership will go through new diversity, sensitivity, and unconscious bias trainings. The old trainings lacked context, so our new trainings will encourage leaders to engage in more difficult conversations by changing us versus them conversations into more nuanced discussions on understanding. Following the leadership training, staff will also be trained in diversity, sensitivity, and unconscious bias trainings, and will be supported by their supervisors to build this new contextual understanding together. But to ensure employees are willing to engage, outside experts will facilitate all of these trainings to mitigate trust issues many have with Google's leadership. Phase 3 of our action plan is critical and includes the creation of a plan review process. With trainings complete with all staff to build this new culture, we need to monitor how effectively our culture has changed. If leadership is managing more effectively, and if employees are more satisfied in the workplace. This will be facilitated with regular meetings between staff and their supervisors to discuss if employees are responding positively to the culture changes, performance reviews, which, above productivity, incorporate code of conduct expectations and allow for disciplinary actions to occur when appropriate, building a company-wide survey to give employees feedback opportunities annually and give that survey teeth by tying leadership's evaluations to potential bonuses that leaders may earn. And at the senior leadership level, making sure an annual review of rules of engagement, the code of business conduct, and training programs is facilitated. There may be opportunities for these to improve as the organization becomes more trusted by employees and is open to positive conflict. And now I turn it over to Traci Cruz, who will outline the consequences of this action plan.
In reaching desired outcomes through the action plan, there will be factors and detractors to success. In supporting success, they will want a clear code of conduct and rules of engagement, better diversity education for all employees, having a clear hierarchy of escalation, tying pay to leadership performance by offering bonuses to management and their employees, team building activities to create cohesiveness outside of the groupthink, removing internal political message boards, at least until all the training can be completed, and ensure management is supporting the new changes, and this may involve removing those who refuse to change. Some of the obstacles that they may face when making these changes may involve things like groupthink. The in-groups and out-groups that have already formed will be difficult to break up. There will be managers who are used to being neutral and disconnected from managing these type of issues. Google will have lost some credibility with their company. And there are also legal ramifications, lawsuits, and fear of making mistakes even with the new guidelines. They'll also receive some pushback in the culture change initiative, and they may lack buy-in from leadership and the board of directors.
Thank you, Traci. In order to harness the factors to success and mitigate the obstacles we expect to face, we are recommending the implementation of a number of contingency plans. First, we want to create accountability by documenting these shifting policies that employees will now be expected to adhere to. The new norms should be supported by our enhanced code of conduct, which will be provided to each current employee when it is created, and also provided to all new employees in their orientation process. Second, we expect that some staff members will be reluctant to change. With new documented procedures and expectations, employees may self-select out of continuing to work at Google, but leadership should be willing to fire employees who refuse to accept these necessary changes. Third, we are open to lengthening the time horizon on the implementation of this action plan. It may take longer for Google to garner leadership support or roll out training to all staff. However, we should make sure that the time horizon is not lengthened by too much, just to provide flexibility of 1 to 3 months on its initial implementation. Because of Google's lack of credibility from this situation, we incorporated bringing outside experts into our action plan as a preemptive contingency. Further aspects of our plan, including the review process, could also be supported by outside experts in order to ensure it is a habit established in this new culture shift. Unfortunately, we may find through this process that we have to replace Google's executive leadership team if they are not effectively engaging in positive organizational change. The board should recognize the importance of this and also see the business reasons for this change. Google staff will be much more efficient and effective in the workplace without the psychological stress of discriminatory practices. Lastly, establishing an anonymous feedback policy will empower all employees to air their concerns appropriately through HR rather than publicly through internal message boards. With less concerns around providing feedback, we can better measure the full extent of issues of the organization, since more people will be willing to come forward without fear of retribution. We believe this will hasten the development of a psychologically safe work climate. I'll hand things off to Jimmy Fanning to wrap us up.
In summary, while trying to create a culture where anything was tolerated, Google accidentally created a culture that fostered both hate and bigotry, with managers that were powerless to address these issues. We recommend that Google establish new, clear rules of office conduct and give managers functional power to enforce them. Google should also strive to improve company-wide training in the areas of diversity and sensitivity. In the first 90 days of implementation, new standards of conduct will be set in place, and Google will establish protocols for punishment when these standards are broken. In the following 90 days, all leadership will undergo training that will empower them to address situations like demurs. In the quarter following implementation, diversity and bias training will be conducted at the staff level. This training should be done by an outside firm due to Google's loss of credibility in this area. As with any plan, ours will have factors working for and against it. We believe that the factors supporting success, namely the new, clear code of conduct and diversity education, will outweigh any obstacles, which may include laissez-faire style management and pushback by staff members. In any action plan, the first step in implementation is making sure it is feasible and realistic. Although it will require a significant initial investment, we believe our plan will benefit Google's culture and save the company money long term. It is also important to remember that some well-thought-out plans may fail when relying too much on the people involved in them being reasonable. We believe we have addressed this potential obstacle by establishing specific expectations and consequences up front that are no more strict than any other company. We have also built several review points into the plan that can be used to change and optimize the plan as needed.